Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Casey Aldrich, and I'm the Associate Director of Global Studies here at the Dickey Center. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for our Going Global presentation. This is a favorite time of year for all of us at the Dickey Center when we have the chance to connect with our dedicated alumni and friends from the classes of 1957 and 1982. 82. It's also wonderful to see so many students here with us today. Today, we're thrilled to showcase the impact of the Great Issues Innovation Fund, which your classes have so generously supported. As many of you know, the Great Issues Innovation Fund enables activities that identify, analyze, and address some of the world's most pressing issues. The fund is designed to deepen Dartmouth students' understanding of international issues, instilling a commitment to making meaningful contributions through ethical involvement and leadership. With its foundation in the liberal arts, the fund supports innovative activities that help to shape future global leaders. Going Global exemplifies these ideals, and we're so excited to share its story with all of you today. As part of the Going Global project, Ben Joel, a member of the class of 2027, spent his summer visiting his peers in Costa Rica, Kenya, Kosovo, Vietnam, and at the United Nations in New York. He immersed himself in diverse surroundings, capturing the work of Dickey Center's international interns and documenting their experience through powerful photos and videos. This afternoon, Ben will share some of the highlights of his journey, the challenges he faced, and the inspiring work of our international interns. He'll also speak to the profound impact that these experiences have had on him personally and on his peers. A bit about Ben. Hailing from McLean, Virginia, Ben is majoring in government modified with economics and is pursuing a minor in international studies. He has served as a photojournalist intern for Dartmouth's Office of Communications and as a resident photographer at Kenya's Mara North Conservancy. His talent has been recognized by the Sony World Photography Competition. On campus, Ben is a War and Peace Fellow at the Dickey Center and has participated in our Great Issue Scholars Program, as well as the first-year Fellows Program with the Irving Institute of Energy and Society. Ben has pursued his passion for social entrepreneurship by completing the Tuck Lab Entrepreneurship Program and the Tuck Business Bridge Program. This winter, he plans to study with the Spanish Department in Argentina. I can confidently say that if we are to repeat this project, finding someone as talented, as organized, and self-driven as Ben will be no easy task. He has truly exceeded our expectations in every way. I know you're all eager to hear from Ben, and we'll be handing things over to him in just a moment. First, though, I just want to briefly outline today's program. To begin, Ben will spend around 30 minutes or so walking us through his journey and sharing insights from his experience. Afterward, we'll open the floor for about 30 minutes for questions and answers, which I will kick off and moderate. Around 5 o'clock, we'll head upstairs to the Russo Gallery, where you'll have the chance to view some of Ben's photographs up close and enjoy some refreshments and conversation. We'll also have a few remarks once everyone is settled in the gallery. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to an engaging presentation and a wonderful discussion. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Casey. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm excited to share with you all about my experience this summer as the Dickey Center Going Global intern. But before I begin, I want to highlight that this opportunity was supported by the classes of 1957 and 1982 Great Issues Innovation Fund. Thank you so much for your support. So to start, I'll give some background on what my plans were. As an overview, my goal was to document the experience of Dickey Center interns working abroad. As an overview, I wanted to capture the diversity and impact of their internships. I wanted to show that these internships, as varied as they were, all have a tremendous impact both on the student and on their host organization's mission. Lastly, and most importantly, it was my goal to raise awareness about the Dickey Center opportunities. I wanted my fellow students to consider seeking new opportunities and the potential of their own impacts. So, my trip by the numbers. Here are some of my favorite statistics. I visited 8 interns in 5 countries. I took 11 international flights that spanned over 36,000 miles. Attention, please. And I hauled around a backbreaking 33 pounds of photographic equipment. And last but not least, my favorite achievement, I consumed a whopping 42 tablets of Pepto-Bismol. Very proud of that one. So, beginning with the first leg of my journey, finding my footing in Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, I visited Emily Pridemore, a Dartmouth senior studying biology and environmental sciences. This summer, Emily worked with CREMA, a Costa Rican NGO dedicated to marine biology conservation work. CREMA's shark research is headquartered in a rural town called San Francisco de Coyote in the Nicoya Peninsula. In Costa Rica, Emily conducted field-based research to determine whether the area around a nearby river mouth served as a juvenile feeding ground for various shark species, including the very endangered hammerheads, blacktips, bull sharks, and nurse sharks. The goal of the research was to promote the establishment of a coastal marine protected area, which would restrict various fishing practices in the local area to prevent overfishing and heavy bycatch. Both of these are very common issues which face Costa Rican coastlines and offshore sites. To accomplish this project, Emily and her supervisor, a key researcher for CREMA, who has dedicated his life to the research and protection of marine predators, would catch, measure, tag, and take DNA samples from juvenile sharks. Now, each day, we would wake up at roughly 4 a.m. before the sun had even risen to begin the day's research. Captain Amato, a local fisherman with a skiff at the small fishing docks, would expertly navigate us through the mouth of the river, dodging massive waves. It was about an hour-long, very bumpy journey out to the research site. Once we got there, Emily and her supervisor would spend the next 4 to 5 hours catching the sharks. Each day, they'd catch anywhere from 1 to 7 sharks, keeping things very interesting. When a shark was on board, it was all hands on deck. I would be dangling over the side of the boat, praying that my camera strap didn't give out, trying to get the best angles to capture the action. Then, after the field research was done for the day, the most exciting part came, the siesta. After, Emily would do chores for CREMA in the afternoon, study for the GREs, and spend time with her fellow researchers. On the weekends, Emily, an avid surfer, would find local beaches to surf with the locals and her fellow researchers. She also went to nearby reefs with her supervisor to go on scuba diving expeditions, tagging manta rays and sharks to help with his research. Playa de Coyote, the nearest beach, was absolutely teeming with biodiversity. Sandpipers, sea snails, and Halloween crabs literally everywhere. I enjoyed taking walks up and down the beach, which was very cathartic, and offered a nice respite from the constant motion of the skiff. Now, Costa Rica presented a number of challenges that kept things interesting. The first challenge was the weather. Checking the weather reports in the weeks before my flight to Costa Rica was an anxiety-inducing endeavor. I would see jaw-dropping humidity and precipitation reports, and at a certain point, I had to just stop checking to maintain my sanity. Upon arriving in the Nicoya Peninsula, I was greeted with, surprise, surprise, a downpour. The initial drive to San Francisco de Coyote was perilous, and let's just say I was very grateful for my driver's 4-wheel drive. And especially when the roads started turning into mini rivers, as you can see in the video. During my time in Costa Rica, my hotel's power would turn off for hours at a time as it stormed violently outside. Another challenge was that there were little to no sources of transportation. To my dismay, no Uber, no Lyft, no taxis. As a result, the only source of motorized transport readily accessible to me was entrepreneurial locals who realized that they could charge whatever they wanted because they were the only gig in town. I'm not proud of how much I spent on transportation to and from Playa Coyote. Their availability was also very unpredictable, meaning I found myself walking miles through the Costa Rican jungle, drenched in sweat, fending off mosquitoes on numerous occasions. The skiff that CREMA conducted research out of also presented a number of challenges. The first was that for the first time in my life, I got seasick. Whether it was the lack of breakfast, the massive waves that we sometimes encountered, or the tiny size of the skiff, or a combination of all three factors, I found myself leaning over the side of the boat on the first day, throwing up while the captain laughed. Not many things are more humbling than that. Here's a photo of me struggling. Lastly, conducting the research in literally shark-infested waters was itself a challenge. I found myself 2.5 hours in one of the 4-hour research sessions, desperately having to go to the bathroom. Now, for some more context, in between catching each shark, everyone on the boat would pass out and catch up on sleep from the early wake-ups. And at this point, when I needed to go to the bathroom, everyone was out cold, except for me. Now, leaning over the side of the boat seemed like an option, but the motion of the boat made that particularly challenging. And against my better judgment, desperation will do things to a person, I lowered myself over the side of the boat into the chummed, shark-infested water so I could relieve myself. My mom was not very happy when I told her that story, but my options were limited. Now, despite all these hurdles, the payoff made it all worth it. In the end, I got to watch one of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen, observe Emily passionately pursuing a future career in marine predator research, and learn more about the importance and impact of marine conservation. Next, New York, part 2, a new perspective in New York. In New York, I visited Mursal Ehsan, a Dartmouth junior studying government. Originally from Afghanistan, Mursal was spending her summer working for the permanent mission of Afghanistan to the United Nations. Mursal helped with research briefs on Afghanistan's humanitarian issues and maintained their mission's website, all while attending General Assembly and Security Council meetings to take notes for her supervisor. The importance of Mursal's work cannot be overstated. She said it best herself. It's important for the Afghan people to have a seat at the table where decisions affecting them are being made. Mursal approached her work with unmatched passion. The Afghan mission to the United Nations is one of the only delegations that represents the people of a nation and not the government. And that's been the case since the Taliban takeover in 2022. For the first time in my life, I felt culture shock returning to my own country. The transition from rural Costa Rica to the bustling New York City streets was fairly jarring. Some highlights from New York City, though, included starting the day with a $1 slice of pizza for breakfast and continuing to eat them for 3 meals in a row. Mursal and I had our fair share of adventures navigating the subway, as you can see on the left side of the slide. And using the subway was a skill that we were both very new to. We also shared a memorable meal at an Afghan restaurant where I got to try kabuli and mantu, which Mursal told me are 2 of the most authentic Afghan dishes. When I insisted on splitting the bill instead of her paying for the whole meal, she told me that I'd shamed her culture by not letting her pay. Needless to say, Mursal was very accommodating. On my first day shadowing Mursal at the United Nations headquarters, I ran into some trouble at the visitor's entrance. After going through a metal detector with my camera bag, the security stopped me and asked, "Where's your media pass?" The only problem was I did not, in fact, have a media pass. So I had to surrender my camera gear and spend the day just scouting photogenic spots in the UN headquarters instead. The next day, Mursal had a clever workaround. As a member of the Afghan delegation, she could enter through a special entrance without a metal detector. I think you all know where this is going. She offered to stow my camera in her backpack, smuggling it in for me so I could document her at work. Mursal was a real partner in my photographic mission. As luck would have it, my time in New York coincided with Manhattan Hedge, a phenomenon where the setting sun is aligned with the east-west streets of Manhattan's grid. I was familiar with the concept from Instagram, but I had no idea that my trip would line up so perfectly. One day, though, walking out of Central Park with Mursal, I spotted a photographer with a tripod set up facing down one of the streets, and I realized my good fortune immediately. Mursal and I watched as the sun descended perfectly in the middle of the street. This day ended up being the only one where the sky was clear enough for a sunset, showing that photography is often a combination of luck and patience. What a way to wrap up my time in New York. After around 30 hours of traveling, I arrived in Hanoi. Part 3, complete cultural immersion in Vietnam. In Vietnam, I visited 3 Dickey Center interns. The first was Hazel Lay, a junior studying economics. She was working for the World Wildlife Fund, researching potential regions for large-scale seagrass restoration, and the climate mitigation benefits of vital blue carbon ecosystems in Vietnam. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to wrap my head around that. Gabby Park, a senior, and Andrew Pham, a sophomore, were the other two interns. They worked for FAD, or the Institute for Population Health and Development. They conducted an independent research project using data that FAD collected in a longitudinal study on health and aging among older adults in Vietnam. Now, Vietnam was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. My first impressions focused on the street life, the history, food, and hospitality. Now, if I were to describe the street scene in Vietnam using one word, it would be overstimulating. When I first arrived in Hanoi, it was at night and I went right to bed. The next morning, I was paralyzed by uncertainty. I was by myself in a completely new continent. It took me a few hours to work up the courage to venture out into the old quarter where my hotel was located, and I was immediately overwhelmed. As you can see, it was a very chaotic scene. This is one of the average street corners. And then the next video is one of my update videos that I sent back to the Dickey Center. That's in the old quarter. When I was out in the street, my eyes didn't know where to look. At all the colorful stores I was passing, the mopeds whizzing mere inches by me, people lounging, enjoying tea on the sidewalk. All at once, I was greeted with a symphony of new sights, smells, and noises that took some time to get used to. Eventually, I learned to find a certain peace in the chaos, embracing the new pace of life, stepping into quiet cafes and pagodas to drink boba and rest with the monks when I needed a break. Coming to Vietnam, the food scene was very much on my radar. Something of legends, the culinary prowess of the Vietnamese have been documented extensively. My personal hero, Anthony Bourdain, described Vietnam as a life-changing experience for him. And I can safely say it lived up to expectations. I still daydream in class about being back in Vietnam, continuing to explore the food scene. With Hazel, who's a Hanoi native, Andrew, who's also from Vietnam, and Gabby, who had been there for several weeks before I arrived, as my guides, I would try a new dish at literally every meal. Hazel's passion for the food was infectious. I devoured every piece of insight she provided, no pun intended, as she walked me through the details of every dish. I quickly realized that Vietnam's history, especially the Vietnam War, is deeply embedded in the streets of Hanoi. Nearly every older man seemed to be a war veteran. They often wore hats adorned with the Communist Party insignia, marking their veteran status with pride. It was eye-opening to grapple with the U.S.'s role in the war, especially after growing up with one set of perspectives in the classroom, only to encounter very different ones in the streets of Hanoi. This contrast became even more striking during my visit to Hao Lo Prison, often ironically called the Hanoi Hilton. This site once held American prisoners of war, including Senator John McCain, after they were shot down over Hanoi. Now, while Vietnamese exhibits depict the POWs as having been treated humanely, the stories from American prisoners tell a different story, one of torture and severe deprivation. The Vietnamese Communist Party continues to promote this propaganda narrative, which can be uncomfortable to confront, but experiencing it firsthand is a vital part of cultural immersion. It's about engaging with perspectives that might conflict with our own or with those that we were taught. While in Hanoi, I had two incredible opportunities to immerse myself in Vietnamese culture: lunch with Hazel's grandparents and dinner with Gabby's host family. Since Hazel was originally from Hanoi, she could visit her grandparents frequently during her internship. And one day, she invited me to join. The moment I arrived, her grandfather warmly grabbed my arm in a strong handshake and practically pulled me in through the door. After a quick tour of their home, I was ushered into the dining room, where a table overflowing with spring rolls and boiled chicken awaited. Hazel's grandfather made sure that my glass was never empty as we toasted again and again with rice wine. After the dinner, as a guest, I was absolutely forbidden from helping with the cleanup. The photo on the right is Hazel with her sister and her grandparents. Now, it was my fortune that I got to experience not one, but two home-cooked meals while I was in Vietnam. The Dickey Center had connected Gabby with a fantastic host family, and one evening, they invited Andrew, Hazel, and me to join them for a dinner. The family was so welcoming. especially their two young boys who had enough energy to power Hanoi, eager to share stories about life growing up in Hanoi and to challenge us in games of chess and foosball. Spoiler alert, I did not win. Again, we were greeted by a feast. This time, I tried some new dishes with chicken parts I had never seen on a plate before, including the head and the feet. After dinner, Andrew's host family joined us, and we all headed to a nearby park. It was remarkable how, despite our differences in age and nationality, we found common ground so easily over food and games. During my weekends in Vietnam, I went to Ninh Binh and Ha Long Bay with Hazel and Gabby. In both these spots, the topography was surreal, and unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Valleys ended abruptly with limestone mountains bursting out of the ground. We explored the local pagodas, one of which was called the 500-step pagoda, which gave us quite the workout, visited iconic restaurants, and learned more about the history of these spots. Exploring Ninh Binh and Ha Long Bay was the perfect way to wrap up my time in Vietnam, leaving me with lasting memories. 1 2-hour layover in Istanbul later, and I finally arrived in Pristina, Kosovo. Part 4, Kosovo, living history in a young country. Here, I visited 2 interns. The first was Maddie Shaw, a senior studying government Russian and Middle Eastern studies. Maddie was working for the Yayaga Foundation, a nonprofit founded by former president of Kosovo and Dartmouth guest lecturer, President Yayaga, that aims to empower women and youth in Kosovo through strategic advocacy. Maddie's interest in this opportunity was sparked last year when she took President Yayaga's course at Dartmouth. Her engagement in Yayaga's work and perspectives inspired her to pursue this internship. And President Yayaga was more than enthusiastic to host her, given her long-standing relationship with Dartmouth and the Dickey Center. At the foundation, Maddie worked on initiatives to promote inter-ethnic reconciliation, shadowing meetings with leaders of other countries, and collaborating on projects like the ZA magazine, which works towards gender equality. In Kosovo, I also visited Nick Booth, a sophomore studying economics who worked for the Reinvest Institute, the oldest think tank in Kosovo. There, he worked on research projects and studied labor trends that work to promote modern economic development in Kosovo with the goal of economic independence. In our free time, Maddie, Nick, and I made an effort to visit as many locations of cultural and historical significance in the country as possible. We were based in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, but there was so much to see outside the city's limits. First, we visited Mitrovica. Mitrovica is a fascinating city because it's split in 2, with a predominantly Albanian population in the southern half and a predominantly Serbian population in the northern half, with a bridge connecting the 2. Walking the bridge going from South Mitrovica to North Mitrovica felt like going back in time decades. Suddenly, tattered Serbian flags were hanging from every light post, graffiti was everywhere, and it seemed as though every other storefront was abandoned. North Mitrovica, simply put, was like a ghost town. It's a place caught in limbo. Kosovo hesitates to invest because of its majority Serbian population, while Serbia avoids investing because it's within Kosovo's borders. This unusual stalemate of sorts makes Mitrovica one of the most striking symbols of unresolved tensions in the region. Next, we visited Jakova, where President Yayaga is originally from. There, we were fortunate enough to attend an Albanian festival, complete with folk music concerts and many new dishes to try. During the summer, ethnic Albanians who make up the Kosovo diaspora return, tripling the population in some municipalities. Lastly, we went to Prizren, where we attended an annual documentary film festival. Prizren is also Kosovo's cultural capital, rich with history and arts. The architecture was beautiful, and an Ottoman fort overlooking the city has been preserved. That's where the photo in the top left was taken from. Now, on a more somber note, scars from the war were ever present during our journey through Kosovo, and I had to learn to face reality, however uncomfortable it was to see. Kosovo, having only gained independence in 2008, is a young country, but its recent history is steeped in ethnic conflict between the majority Albanian population and the Serbs, as well as the brutal ethnic cleansing carried out by Milosevic, events still vividly remembered by many. Visiting monuments, museums, and exhibits, Maddie, Nick, and I absorbed the gravity of these tensions in a way that no classroom could ever replicate. Each day that passed in Kosovo, we uncovered another of the many layers of complex historical context. One of the most powerful aspects of our journey was visiting exhibits about the war's victims, each story more heartbreaking than the last. This photo is from an exhibit about the missing children from the war. Now, the gravity of the tensions became instantly apparent to me after one moment in particular, and I know Nick loves this story. Continuing our journey to as many notable landmarks in Kosovo as possible, we decided to visit a Serbian monastery one day. Now, for context, these monasteries are bastions of Serbian cultural heritage and history in an otherwise majority Albanian country. However, Nick had become very accustomed to speaking Albanian in Pristina, as the city is 97% Albanian. So when a man handed something to Nick in the monastery, Nick replied with "Faleminderit," which means thank you in Albanian. It was like a flip switched. The man became instantly enraged. "What did you just say?" Nick, realizing his mistake, replied with "thank you," this time in English, but the damage was done. The man responded, "You dare speak Albanian in a Serbian monastery? You are a weird man." A Serbian-American bystander quickly stepped in to tell us to just speak English because we didn't fully understand the situation, but I think we understood the unresolved tensions that still shape life in Kosovo in that moment more than we had at any point previous. President Yayaga played a very significant role during our time in Kosovo. Not only did she provide us with top-notch restaurant and travel recommendations, but she also took the time to have lunch with us and become a genuine mentor to Maddie. Getting to eat a meal with her or even just stroll down the street with her was such a privilege, and I shamelessly bragged to every taxi driver and tour guide about our lunch plans with her. During lunch, she generously shared stories from her career as director of police and president, and also insights on contemporary issues facing Kosovo. Maddie's relationship with President Yayaga was especially meaningful. President Yayaga took Maddie under her wing, going on hikes with her and bringing her to meetings with important figures. It was truly a unique and even surreal opportunity to witness firsthand the wisdom and mentorship of a former head of state. Now, after wrapping up my time in Pristina, I had the daunting task of getting to Kenya. My first stop was to North Macedonia, where I departed from Skopje Airport after a 2-hour delay on the runway. Next, I arrived in Frankfurt for my, brace yourself, 15-minute layover. I don't think I've ever sprinted so fast in my life. Here's a video of that. With a backpack on my back and my front, I left my dignity in the dust and raced through the airport. Yeah, that's a good one. Good news and bad news. Good news is that I made my flight. Bad news is that my luggage did not. Oh well. When I arrived in Mombasa 10 hours later, I had a whole other challenge waiting for me: a Kenyan customs officer. As a foreigner, flying a drone is illegal in Kenya. However, what I didn't realize was that mere possession was also problematic, making my drone ripe for confiscation at the border. I also did not expect that the customs officer was going to inform me that he was confiscating not only my drone, but all of my camera gear. That would be a little troublesome. I politely explained to him that the sole reason I was in Kenya was to use that camera gear, but he would not budge. Eyeing my camera equipment, he then insisted that I pay a $300 fee for importing filming equipment because my camera had a recording function. I pointed out that by his overly broad definition, the average tourist camera and even his iPhone would be subject to the fine. He did not appreciate that argument. At some point, it occurred to me that he was less concerned by the legal definition of filming equipment and more focused on collecting this fine that started to sound a lot like a bribe. But I was resolute. I would not enter Kenya without my camera equipment, and I would not pay a bribe. At one point, he asked to speak with my work supervisor. Knowing that it was in the middle of the night back on the East Coast and my points of contact at the Dickey Center were probably sleeping, I decided to call my mom and pretend that she was my supervisor since I had been texting her about my situation. I quickly changed her contact name in my phone from mom to her actual name and gave her a call. And within 3 seconds, I had already messed up. Delirious from being sleep deprived, I dialed the phone and in front of the officer, I said, "Hi, Mom." That was a bummer. In addition to the supervisor strategy, I tried joking with the customs officer colleagues, disputing the definition of filming equipment in the customs regulation, and outright pleading. In the end, It was simply a war of attrition. He gave up and waved me away, exacerbated that I had wasted an hour of his time. I felt triumphant. Finally, I got to keep my camera with no bribe. After this nice little customs officer episode, I was finally able to enter Mombasa. Part 5, experiencing a cultural melting pot in Kenya. Here, I visited Nelly Mkamburi, a sophomore who is originally from Mombasa, Kenya. Nelly worked for the Bamburi Afya Medical Center, a nonprofit organization that empowers adolescent girls in rural schools through educational talks on subjects like menstruation and mental health, as well as giving out important resources like menstrual products. The impact of Nelly's work was plain to see. I would watch Nelly give her talk to these vulnerable children, including orphans and young girls who have been sexually exploited, and watch their faces transform in real time. They were captivated by Nelly's optimism, her engaging enthusiasm, and the hope she provided, making it clear just how meaningful her presence was to each of them. My time in Kenya taught me that cultural immersion is enhanced by breaking out of the observer box and becoming an active participant. One particular moment stands out. At Mkwajuni Primary School in Kilifi, I watched as Nelly gave her talk. But when she was done, she came over to me and whispered, "The girls want to see you speak." Now, I was a little caught off guard. I hadn't prepared any materials to speak on, and I'd been trying to embody the fly on the wall as I took the pictures. But nevertheless, I got up in front of the 50 or so girls and introduced myself. "Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I go to college with Nelly. Happy to answer any questions you have." Felt pretty good about myself. Nelly comes over to me then and says, "They want to see you dance." Yeah. Now this was an unpleasant development. Yeah. I wanted to spare myself the embarrassment of dancing in front of the class and also spare the girls from having to watch me try to dance. Desperate, I tried to think of ways to bail myself out of this rapidly deteriorating situation when I finally decided I was going to start a dance party. Told everyone to get up. As the girls started singing, we all started dancing together. And in the end, I had successfully turned a very potentially awkward moment into a cross-cultural celebration. Here's that video, and apologies in advance for my awful dance skills. You guys get the idea. Guided by Nelly, we would explore Mombasa's old town in our free time in between school visits. It's a fascinating melting pot shaped by Swahili, Arab, Asian, Portuguese, and British influences. Dating back to medieval times, the old town's architecture includes colorful alleys and intricately designed balconies, reflecting this unique blend of cultures. In Mombasa, Nelly, her sister, and I went on a food tour, allowing me to truly immerse myself in the delicious and intriguing blend of cultures that Mombasa had to offer. On the last leg of my trip, I cast aside my parents' advice cautioning me about street food and went all in, hence the staggering Pepto-Bismol consumption. Then, after an overnight layover in Frankfurt and then a flight to Washington, D.C., I was finally home and the journey concluded. I came back with so much more than I expected. Yes, I had taken thousands of photos, but I also collected memories, insights, and lessons that only real-world experience could teach. Here are some of those reflections. First, discomfort is often a necessary step on the road to cultural immersion. Discomfort came in many forms this summer, whether it was facing extreme heat and rain in Costa Rica and Vietnam, completely subsisting off of Cliff Bars and sriracha-flavored chicken jerky for days in Costa Rica, or making a mad dash through the airport. In the end, though, these moments just showed me how adaptable and resilient I could be under pressure, and left me with memories I wouldn't trade for anything. Next, food. Food played a powerful role as a bridge between cultures, with each meal sparking conversations that started with ingredients and unfolded into rich narratives of cultural and national history. From Hazel painstakingly explaining Vietnamese dishes and their cultural significance, to sharing Afghan food in New York City with Mersal, to a food tour in Mombasa with Nelly, followed by the warmth of a home-cooked meal from her mom. Through these meals, I discovered that food is far more than sustenance. It's a gateway into people's lives, histories, and identities. Next, planning. Now, this journey required a lot of advanced planning. Once I identified the places to visit, I needed to develop a travel plan that connected the 4 continents. When identifying housing, some destinations were easy, such as Hanoi with its plethora of hotels and Airbnbs, but others were a little more challenging and required me to get creative, including a kitesurfing village in Kalifi. I also did extensive internet research for each location beforehand to identify interesting backdrops for photography. Despite this, though, I learned that spontaneity is essential for a journey of this scope. The circumstances I encountered required me to be adaptable once on the ground. There were a number of unexpected events that kept me on my toes. In Kenya, for example, which had been experiencing frequent, massive, and sometimes violent protests all summer, I had to navigate disruptions for the work schedule and steer clear of certain sites. Through it all, though, this experience taught me that careful planning is invaluable, but so is the flexibility to embrace the unexpected. The fourth lesson, finding the balance between participation and observation. There are certainly moments that call for observation, like learning about the missing children from the Kosovo War. But for every moment that I observed, there was a moment where I participated. It's really the personal connections, like the school children in Kenya or the war veterans in Vietnam, that will leave the deepest impression and help you truly understand a culture. I learned that immersion isn't about observing from a distance, but about participating fully in the everyday life of a place you're in. Fifth, collaboration. As a photographer, I had certain ideas about the types of images I wanted to capture, but most of the time, it required the close cooperation of the interns. Mersal helped get the camera into the United Nations headquarters. Hazel and Nellie had lots of insider local insights, and Maddie had off-the-charts executive function and set up meaningful excursions for us to go on. They reminded me that the best stories are often told through teamwork and shared experiences. And lastly, gratitude. Many times before, during, and after my travels, I would sit and reflect on the magnitude and significance of this experience. What a gift. Serving as the Dickey Center's Going Global intern, I enjoyed so many opportunities for growth. As a photojournalist, I continued to develop my storytelling and photographic skills. As a collaborator, I worked closely with the Dickey Center staff and the interns abroad. And as a person, I expanded my cultural awareness as a global citizen. I sincerely appreciate the Dickey Center and the classes of 1957 and 1982 for entrusting me with such an awesome responsibility. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey this summer, Ben. I've heard Ben tell these stories, and every time he shares them again, I'm learning new things. Some of them more concerning than others. The chummy, shark-infested waters. It's clear that this experience was as impactful for you personally as it was for our interns in the field. I want to start things off. We're going to turn it over to questions soon. I had a list of them prepared, but given that we're running a little bit short on time, I'm just going to ask one to get us started. And now that we've heard about your journey this summer, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about what your journey has been like since you've been back on campus. Maybe share about how and where you've had the opportunity to share about your experience and what sort of impact you think that has had on the community.
Thank you. Well, the mission of raising exposure for the Dickey Center has certainly not ended when I've gotten back to campus. Starting off with the Russo Gallery right outside of the Dickey Center, I was given the opportunity to display my work there. I also got interviewed by the Alumni Magazine, who will be publishing a piece about my experience. And I mean, it's been very gratifying to see already the impact that this has had. Peter Jenkinson, the program manager for the Global Studies at the Dickey Center, shared with me yesterday, actually, that he's had students see my work in the Russo Gallery and come inside to the Dickey Center and inquire about opportunities. So, I mean, that's really gratifying to see, and I think it really reinforces the importance of an experience like this and the experience of other interns.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
We have two people with microphones, and I actually I'm going to cut my list of questions short so that we make sure that we have time to have your questions answered. We have about 15 minutes, and then we'll continue questions and answers and discussion upstairs. I should have mentioned at the beginning that many of our interns who've been visited in the field are also present today, so we can, you feel free to ask them questions upstairs as well. Do we have any questions in the audience? Melissa?
Can I pass this mic down too?
Fascinating, and thank you. Melissa Cook, 82. One thing really struck me was your comment about the different perceptions of the Vietnam War there versus here. And I experienced something similar when I went to Spain and learned about the Spanish Civil War. And it caused some pretty uncomfortable conversations with professors here. And I'm just curious how you've carried that through and how widely understood do you think that is, that the benefit of travel like you and the interns are doing is that very different perspective?
That's a great question. Thank you. I would say that however understood it is now, it needs to be more understood. I mean, growing up, I felt like, there was a certain level of demonization of the Vietnamese, learning about the Vietnam War. Hazel's grandfather was a Vietnam War veteran. So I got to hear about his story. I got to hear stories from, other people on the street. And it really is an important thing. I mean, it's easy to box yourself into a very specific worldview, and it's only through travel that you're able to really expand that.
Other questions? One right here. We'll pass the microphone to you so that our friends online can hear.
Can I ask my question? Could we see who are the interns? I know we've got this gentleman. Any other interns?
Nick in the back. Maybe stand up. Maddie is in the back. Maddie was in Kosovo. We have Emily, who was in Costa Rica.
Tom's going to go next. Okay. So my question is, as a member of the class of 82 and representing our dear partners in the class of 57, one of the components of our class gift is to support the ethical leadership and experience of the undergraduate community from a global perspective. I wondered if you, I'm gathering, because of your wonderful presentation, that you had that sense of need for cultural competencies and inclusion. Did you have a sense of that ethical experience and leadership that we are imagining that our class gifts really want to promote?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it takes great integrity to, even embark on a journey that these interns do. I'm thinking of Emily going to Costa Rica, working on conservation projects, subjecting herself to this very rural town for 7 weeks, just so she could learn from a mentor and step into that leadership role herself. That's true across the board for all the interns. Working on government projects, public policy, like Maddie and Nick, focusing on environmental issues again. So it definitely is like a core part of the internship to figure out how to lead and how to step into those leadership roles.
Tom, did you have a question? No. Other questions?
I was just posing.
Okay. Looks like Al has a question in the front.
Good afternoon, Al Forbes, 82. So how have you changed and how have you been affected? How has your world vision view been changed? And that can come from you or any of the other interns that might want to speak to that.
Yeah, I can start. I would say that my horizons have been broadened. I think at Dartmouth, with its many pre-professional routes and opportunities, it's very easy to find the well-trodden path and go down that. And it's hard sometimes to realize that there's literally an entire world out there of opportunities. So I think personally, it's shown me that I don't need to just limit my focus on opportunities in the United States. I can take the talents of Dartmouth interns abroad and explore that. And I would also say, as a photojournalist, like I mentioned, I got to pick up so many new techniques I got to understand what it really means to be on the fly on the wall in some circumstances and step into a more participatory role in others. So, yeah.
I have a question over here.
This is maybe less of a layered question, but if you had the chance to take this opportunity again, are there any countries you wish you could go to?
That's a great question. Because the opportunity was only 7 weeks and I wanted to make sure I got to spend enough time with each intern, I had to make some cuts that hurt me to make. For example, we had a Dickey Center intern going to Norway for an indigenous festival, which would have been very rewarding to go to. Another one of those opportunities was someone constructing homes in Ghana and Rwanda, those 2 different interns. And it just wasn't feasible because of all the connecting flights it would have required and the time frame, but I think those locations for sure I would have loved to go to.
Wendell.
Any specific business connections you might perceive coming forth?
Not right now. I mean, I've had actually a number of people offer to set me up with Nat Geo photographers, which is an absolute dream. I'm getting a coffee with Jeffrey Kirby, who works with the Dickey Center and is a Nat Geo photographer early November. So a lot of promising things, yeah.
We have a number of Thayer School and other Dartmouth adventures going on.
Wow. Yeah.
Engineering, commercial engineering responses, energy sources, all kinds of things.
Yeah, very exciting stuff.
Love to have you working with it.
Would love to work with it.
Question in the back.
Could I just ask, I know you only had 7 weeks. What do you think the difference is between having 2 weeks in every place or do you wish you had more time in one place like the interns had? And how do you think that would have changed your experience? Because there's a huge difference between visiting a place and actually living there.
I completely agree. Certainly, I would have loved to spend so much more time in each location. I think for as much as I did learn, I was really just scratching the surface. I think the interns can attest to it. Spending a prolonged period of time in these countries really allows you to go in so much depth and learn so many different facets of the culture or the history. So for sure, I wish I could go back to all these places.
So I would imagine that there are lots of Dartmouth students abroad in the summertime. And how did you choose? How did you know what the options were, and how did you choose the ones that you went to go see?
That's a great question. It was a really hard process. I think the Dickey Center sent out more than 50 interns this past year. Yeah, exactly, just over the summer. So it was very challenging. Many factors went into it. I wanted to consider a diversity of locations that I was visiting. So North America, Central America, Africa, Europe, Asia. I also wanted to make sure the internship spanned over a whole range of subjects. So government, public policy, environmental, just covering as many bases as possible. And then the interns themselves, I wanted to make sure that they were eager to have their photo taken, which definitely helped collaborate with them. Yeah, thank you.
Right here.
My question is, how did the other people, except for the interns, react when you were taking pictures of them? Do you think this might have changed them, the way they behave?
Yeah, I was very cognizant about my role in all the places I was going. I have some experience, trying to be a fly on the wall. I worked for the Office of Communications here, and that requires me to go to many events where I'm trying to blend in, which is a little hard when you're 6'4". I try my best. Had to include that. But yeah, it was challenging in some moments. One moment comes to mind where I was in Mombasa, in the old town, and I was taking photos of the street as the sun was setting. Now, I love to take candid photos of people, but in this moment, I was just taking photos of the sun reflecting off the buildings because I was very aware that some people might not like to have their photo taken in that context. Nevertheless, though, I heard this commotion this table of older men behind me, they started like yelling at me out of the blue. They were like, no photos, no photos. I was like, I'm just taking photos of the street. And I like retreated down the street trying to create some distance. And one of them actually followed me and like yelled some death threats at me, which was very scary. So I think that taught me that like no matter how prepared you are for a situation and what you think your role is going to be in that situation, you have to stay on your toes and recognize that not everyone is open to have their photo taken. Yeah, thank you for the question.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one, and then we'll make our way upstairs.
What advice would you have for any people who are going out to do similar work for the Dickey Center or similar centers at Dartmouth? What would you tell them? What would you advise them on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Adding on from the question from earlier, I would say that try to spend as much time as you can in each location. I actually got that advice from Emily Unger, who was the Going Global intern from 10 years ago. I hopped on a Zoom call with her before I went, and that was her advice to me. On top of that, she advised me that I would continue to pass on as advice to try to branch out, go on as many trips as possible. My time in Vietnam, for example, was very enhanced by my trips to Ninh Binh and Ha Long Bay, and allowed me to explore a whole dimension of the country that I wouldn't have got from just staying in Hanoi. So I would say those two are the primary ones, and then my last piece of advice is pack a lot of meds, a lot of Pepto-Bismol, more than you think you need.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you everyone for the questions.